Geographically, the continent of Europe might look the same, but the political map is constantly changing. Since the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union, the last decade has evolved dramatically. We've seen a fresh emphasis on international cooperation, the emergence of new nations, and the reappearance of others like Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia that had faded from view for half a century. Today, for all Europeans, history is very much in the making. Through the ongoing process of enlargement, the EU continues to grow in size, with ancient nations like Poland and Hungary assuming again their historic place at the heart of Europe. They now look west rather than east to shape their future. In just 2 generations, Europe has made strides nobody could have foreseen. Almost 60 years ago, the continent was in ruins. War raged across national borders, spreading like brushfire across the globe. By the end of World War II, tens of millions of lives had been lost, and many millions more became refugees. Much of Europe lay in rubble, including some of the great cities like Berlin, Dresden, Warsaw, Rotterdam, and Belgrade. In many countries, and particularly in Germany, essential services like water supply, sanitation facilities, roads, factories, houses, and farmlands were completely destroyed. But the longer-term consequence of World War II was that Europe was divided by a political line separating East from West. The Soviet Union, which suffered so heavily in wartime, wanted to create a buffer zone to ensure the security of its western border. The Soviets took strategic control of most of Eastern Europe by installing communist regimes in each state, effectively splitting the continent in 2. As the Cold War pitted the ideologies of communism and the free market against each other, the division of Europe looked permanent. Countries in the East, like Poland, Hungary, Romania, and the Baltic states, were reconstructed under Soviet influence. Traditional powers in the West, France, Germany, and Italy, began the process of rebuilding, divorced politically and economically from their eastern neighbors and separated by the Iron Curtain. But exactly how safe was the future? Even in a divided Europe, could traditional enemies such as France and Germany trust each other not to take up arms again? In the eyes of French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman, the best way forward was to find and develop ways of working together as neighbors. Europe will be built through practical achievements that first create a sense of common purpose, he said. Reasoning that if nations came together on issues of mutual interest, cooperation as trading powers would replace the ancient hostility that had previously brought them together in war. It was a new way of thinking. Working with his parliamentary colleague Jean Monnet, Schuman proposed that 6 countries join together to form the European Coal and Steel Community. The community would reach working agreements on coal and steel production, aiming to pool resources rather than compete with each other. An international authority was set up in Luxembourg to administer the scheme. Recognizing that their common interest was better served by working together, 6 countries, Belgium, France, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, and what was then West Germany, went along with the idea. When they signed up, they undertook to substitute for age-old rivalries the merging of their essential interests, to create by establishing an economic community the basis for a broader and deeper community among peoples long divided by bloody conflicts, and to lay the foundations for institutions which will give direction to a destiny henceforward shared. And so Schuman's vision came into being in 1952. Just 7 years after full-scale fighting between these same countries was brought to an end. It was a sign of what could be achieved. The experiment worked just as Schuman had hoped. The community soon wanted to extend their trade agreement to cover more than coal and steel. And so in 1957, the same 6 countries signed the Treaty of Rome. They renamed themselves the European Economic Community, or EEC, and it was here that the idea of a common market really took hold. The rest of Europe watched these developments with great interest. The advantages of political and economic cooperation were plain to see. In these post-war years, it also made the continent safer for everybody else. In 1973, Ireland, Britain and Denmark joined the European Economic Community. The community's interests and activities expanded, and in 1979, direct elections to the European Parliament were held in each member state. Greece was the 10th country to join in 1981, followed by Spain and Portugal 5 years later. Also in 1986, all 12 member states signed the Single European Act, which strengthened the economic and political links between them and effectively made the community a single market. In 1995, membership grew to 15, when Austria, Sweden and Finland joined. As a trading bloc, the community had the economic might to compete with other industrial powers like America and Japan. Unity brought strength. Other treaties signed by member states, including the Maastricht and Amsterdam treaties, expanded the community's involvement to include freedom of movement, banking, human rights, security matters and foreign policy. A single currency was introduced in 1999. The euro became the national currency for most EU member states, including Ireland. Gone were the Irish pound, the German mark, Italian lira and the Spanish peseta, although 3 countries, Denmark, Sweden and Britain, retained their own currency instead of going with the euro. When the title of the community was changed to European Union or EU, it reflected much more than a name change. What started out as an economic community had broadened into areas far beyond economics, like environmental protection, food safety, and hundreds of other issues of common concern. The political map of Europe had changed significantly in 1989 with the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the breakup of the Soviet Union. The economic strides made by EU member states had created a gap in living standards between East and West. Germany was reunified in 1990, but the difficulties bringing East and West together economically, politically and socially were a reminder that change across Europe could not happen overnight. Through the following decade, citizens of the former Eastern Bloc wanted a chance to participate in the full development of Europe. They applied for membership of the community. To gain EU membership, each applicant country must meet a set of stringent conditions known as the Copenhagen criteria. The state must be a functioning democracy with the rule of law firmly established and encompassing a broad range of human rights, including protection of minorities. It must have a functioning open economy capable of competing within the European internal market, and it must adopt the range of European laws that have been put in place since the foundation of the community. The process of accession began with individual negotiations between applicant countries and the European Commission. Discussions took place under 31 headings or chapters on diverse issues ranging from freedom of movement to agriculture to food safety and environmental protection. Although there were some similarities between cases, the particular needs of each applicant varied from country to country. Cyprus, for example, had the key issue of the island's division to contend with. Bulgaria has to review its aging nuclear plants. Negotiations were completed with 10 of the applicant countries whose membership plans were on target. 9 of the applicant countries put EU membership to a national vote by referendum, and the people in all 9 countries voted in favour of accession. Cyprus ratified the treaty according to its own parliamentary. New voices to be heard, the institutions of the community had to accommodate the new member states. The Nice Treaty introduced changes to accommodate the enlarged community. The number of seats in the European Parliament was increased to 732, distributed among 27 countries, including Bulgaria and Romania. Germany being granted the biggest quota with 99 seats. Ireland will have 12. The European Commission contains a representative from each member state, increasing in size to 25 members, and eventually to 27 members when Romania and Bulgaria formally join the community. The number of votes allocated to each member state in the Council of Ministers was altered to take account of the arrival of 10 new member states. This marks the 5th and largest enlargement of the EU since Robert Schumann's vision almost 60 years ago. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Slovenia, Cyprus and Malta being the 10 countries approved for EU membership. Negotiations with Romania and Bulgaria are continuing, and discussions with Turkey are at a preliminary stage. The Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania waited long for these developments, taking their chance to copper-fasten the independence they won from the Soviet Union in 1991. Estonia's capital, Tallinn, is a UNESCO heritage site, but Riga in Latvia and Vilnius in Lithuania are also historic cities with a taste for the modern. Poland is the largest of the 10 accession countries with a population of almost 40 million, bordering 7 countries. Arguably, it was the shipyard workers under Lech Wałęsa at Gdansk that spearheaded the drive to independence in 1989 that eventually led to freedom for all of the Eastern European countries a short time later. The Czech Republic, celebrated by the beauty of Prague, lies at the center of Europe. To its east is Slovakia. The Czechs and Slovaks agreed to separate in 1993, dissolving the former Czechoslovakia. Budapest on the Danube is Hungary's magnificent capital. Slovenia is the mountainous alpine state in former Yugoslavia. The Mediterranean islands of Cyprus and Malta, with a combined population of about 1 million, are the smallest of the new arrivals. Both islands have figured prominently in European history and mythology for several millennia. So what does EU membership mean to these applicant countries? For many people in former Eastern Europe, the EU means a political leap forward as much as economic opportunity. For a start, it reinforces the new democracies of Eastern Europe. By joining the EU, all of these countries assert their right to take their place among the union of nation-states that make up the present-day European Union. Just as critically, it provides an opportunity to achieve a better standard of living. Freedom of movement will remove barriers on travel and will eventually allow EU passport holders to work anywhere in the Union. These developments will revive the cultural interchange that had been a hallmark of European life for centuries. From the earliest times, the Eastern states provided much cultural enrichment in Europe, ranging across the arts from the music of Chopin, Dvorak and Bartók, to leading figures in world cinema like Kieślowski, Michael Curtiz and Milos Forman, to authors such as Václav Havel and Josef Attila. Europe's rich academic traditions, once severed by the Iron Curtain, are fully reinstated. The scientific heritage of Poland, for example, that produced Nicholas Copernicus and the double Nobel Prize winner Marie Curie, will again form part of a collaboration among all European states in the area of scientific research. Decades of administration under the former Soviet bloc leave many of these applicant countries with a standard of living considerably poorer than EU member states in Northern Europe. Some of them need assistance to modernize their infrastructure, industry, technology and communications. Passing the resolution on enlargement, the European Parliament said it was fully aware that the opening of a single market among regions with such widely different structures is an undertaking unprecedented in economic history. In an effort to bridge the gap, the EU is investing heavily in structural programs in each of the applicant countries. It's a huge project, even by EU standards. In absolute terms, it is estimated that the total direct expenditure of the EU on enlargement between 1990 and 2006 will amount to €69.5 billion. According to EU projections, it will have been money well spent. In fact, when considering some of the smaller applicants like Malta, Cyprus, Slovenia, Slovakia and the Baltic states, the Irish model is a case in point. When Ireland joined the community in 1973, the standard of living was considerably lower than mainland Europe. It's interesting to note that in 2002, a number of the accession countries were largely similar in terms of wealth levels to that of Ireland in 1973. Over the years, Ireland has benefited from regional development, cohesion funds and structural aid from the community. The result has been that in 2002, Ireland's average GDP per capita was 125% of the EU average. It's been a remarkable transformation, and not surprisingly, many of the accession countries see Ireland as the prime example of the benefits of EU membership. From being a recipient of EU funds, Ireland is in the course of becoming a net contributor. The EU strategy long-term is that each of these new member states will succeed in the same way. By investing now, the plan is to make these countries more productive. Enlargement will create new markets within Europe. While on issues of world trade, the EU will strengthen its hand as an even bigger economic unit. The enthusiasm of the Eastern European states for EU membership can be gauged by the dramatic strides that they have taken to satisfy the requirements for membership. Their national laws have been overhauled to make them compatible with EU law, known as the Acquis communautaire. All of the new members are committed to introducing the euro as their currency when they satisfy the economic tests to do so. Huge efforts have gone into modernizing their industry and production facilities, in meeting the EU's environmental standards and social legislation. In fact, the benefits of enlargement of the Union began to appear even before the countries concerned were admitted. Marxist, state-controlled monopolies were reformed as free and open market economies. Human rights legislation replaced the old authoritarianism that characterized daily life in the Soviet bloc. In a little over 50 years, the EU has surpassed the most enthusiastic hopes of its father figures, Robert Schuman and Jean Monnet. Just as Schuman envisaged, the EU's progress has produced stability among its members, put peace before war and mutual interest against traditional rivalry. It has extended the zone of stability, security and prosperity across the continent. Of course, member states remain as sovereign nations. However, the interdependence of sovereign nations which characterizes the Union pools the resources of members to the advantage of all. What began as an agreement on coal and steel production between 6 countries has grown to a wide-ranging economic, financial, legislative, multinational union. The EU is growing to encompass almost all of the nations of Europe. Membership of the Union presents the opportunity for Europe's citizens to reap the benefits of membership and to play a full part in shaping the future of modern Europe.